Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, I'm William Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of the Up Arrow Podcast, where I feature the best minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and beyond, as well as help you up arrow your business and your personal life. I'm excited about the guest that I have today, Phil Rosen. Phil is an award-winning journalist and author and the co-founder and editor of Opening Bell Daily. He quit his job as a senior reporter at Business Insider to launch the new venture. He's also the creator of Journalists Club, hosting dinners and events in New York City for reporters, writers, and editors, and he also runs a popular blog on personal growth and careers. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, William. It's great to be here and excited to dive into whatever we dive into.
Yeah. I always like talking about who introduced us in a lot of these episodes. And what's interesting is nobody introduced us. We introduced ourselves, or rather, I reached out to you because I'm a big fan of, at the time it was, I think, called, it wasn't Opening Bell Daily. What was it? 10 Things Before the Opening Bell, right?
Yes, that was Business Insider's old newsletter, which they shut down about a year ago.
Yep. And I was very sad when they shut that down. I reached, and that's basically, I think, when I reached out to you, I was like, wait a minute, no, you can't shut this down. This is my favorite. This is one of the only daily newsletters that I actually open and read every single day. Please don't do this to me. And so I was very happy when you launched Opening Bell Daily to get me back into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a great experience for me writing, a mainstream newsroom's daily newsletter. And that gave me sort of the tools and the know-how and the confidence to launch an independent one. And so far, I think this week marks week 6 of the new newsletter. So we're really in the early stages. And reader response has been great so far. So that's been really exciting.
I love it. So today we're going to be talking about market trends, pitching journalists, editorial strategy, and personal branding. And my hope is that when you finish this episode, you'll have a better idea of how to use these strategies to grow your business. Before we get into that, though, I do want to announce our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million and one that IPO'd recently. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. Okay. On to the good stuff here. Phil, I know that you don't consider yourself to be an expert on markets, and so you're very careful about that, and I appreciate that because a lot of journalists may not do the same thing. But you've spoken to so many experts on markets over the years now, and I at least wanted to pick your brain about some of the things that you have learned. And let's start with maybe, are there certain charts or places that you would say if somebody is running a business, e-commerce business, and they want to stay on top of what's going on in the markets, aside from subscribing to your newsletter, what are a couple of good charts or places that they could go to?
So I would say reading widely is the best thing I've done to really learn about markets and finance and the economy. Pretty much every morning I read the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and the Financial Times pretty much cover to cover. And that, that's been like years of that. So that, I am a journalist, so I wouldn't position myself as a financial expert, but yeah, you pick up a lot of things by reading everything all the time. And for my job, I write about it every day too. So that's the synthesizing of all that information I read all morning. So I would say diversifying your sources of information is just critical. As far as learning the markets and understanding it from, whether it's interest rates or the stock market, or even, if recession indicators are flashing, these are all things that are probably good to be aware of if you're running a business, but also if you're an investor or an advisor of some sort.
Yeah. How do you stay balanced? So I know that you said that you're reading a lot of different sources, and every given day, I can see significant articles that are saying, this is it, ready for the apocalypse. And then there's, the bulls that are on the complete opposite side saying like, nope, we're here, bull run, let's go. How do you find and weed through all of that to really have I would say, a really good balanced perspective in your newsletter.
Yeah, I think a lot of the balance comes from talking with pessimists and optimists. So something I try to do
Sure.
every day, I make a lot of phone calls with sources, and those include, economists or strategists at banks, investors. And usually I get a good sense of what I want to say in my newsletter because I talk to people that are very bullish on, whatever the day's news may be. But then there's also
Mhm.
the sort of perma bears who, no matter what the data or the stock market or whatever is doing, they will say, we are on the brink of a catastrophe. And, I will say for myself, yeah, I'm definitely an optimist. I believe things get better. And I think the sort of the long zoom out, the long road of history always tilts upward. And I think that's true in markets. Especially I think stocks are the most obvious example. Stocks always go up. That's pretty much, on a long enough time span, stocks will go up. And to me, that is an easy enough North Star to write from. And, that's maybe simplifying it a little bit. But I think generally, if you want to understand the market, coming from a place where, okay, if I just stay put and be patient, things will improve. I think that's a very good thing to know as a starting point, but also something to aim for.
Yeah. That's such a good, let's say, analog or corollary to the D2C space here as well. And so, this being one of the episodes where I'm using a lot more lateral thinking to kind of bring other thoughts into our world. One of the ideas there is, like you said, the perma bears. We have those in ad buying as well. There are perma bears who every morning you're convinced that Facebook ads is going to collapse on itself and will never work again. And it's funny to kind of read and watch that. And then you've got, the other ones who are perma bulls, and it's like, just set it and forget it and don't ever think about it again. And wading through all of that nonsense sometimes on Twitter or X is always interesting. And so I think that you're right on the money there with that and being able to wade through that.
Yeah, and I think also it's not in it's not necessarily in your or your business's best interest to be a pessimist because why are
Sure.
you what would you have to strive for then if you're not optimistic things will get better? And whether that's advertising or sales or even just your business operations, if you don't believe things will get better, then you're certainly not going to convince anyone else things are going to get better.
Yeah, no, that's wise words. So let's get into the more the meat here, editorial strategy. You've written over 2,000 articles on Business Insider, so you've done a lot of editorial strategy here. I hesitate to call it this, but I can't help myself because it's morning and I'm a dad. What is your philosophy on editorial
Yeah.
strategy?
For starters, I think volume wins over time. So
Mm.
if uh, I've talked to folks, they say, yeah, I'm launching a newsletter, and then they tell me they're going to publish once a month or twice a month.
Sure.
And then to me, that just says, okay, so you're not really launching a newsletter. You're going to write occasionally some, like, when you feel like it. And that is that's the opposite of a strategy. I think a strategy involves high volume and high reps because if you don't go through that, you won't even know what your product could look like or what it could be at its best, at its fullest potential, because you get to your fullest potential through volume. And, I think that applies to podcasts or newsletters or running a news site. Volume will win over time because you will get to your end goal faster as far as learning what your readers want and learning what you want your brand to be and how you can deliver on your brand promise. So that's, again, I think I'm a pretty simple person as far as like, okay, the best approach is just going to be outwork and, outwork everyone else through volume, and each individual article or piece, of course you want to make it as good as possible, but if you focus on the long game and trying to show up every day, I think that's just such a winning strategy. And, this applies to way more outside editorial strategy, but especially with editorial strategy, it's pretty hard to beat someone that never stops showing up.
Sure. I think there was a study done about that. And I don't remember where I read this. I want to say it was in the Outliers book by Malcolm Gladwell, where he talks about that, right? Where there was essentially they were given two tasks, or two teams were given a task of coming up with something really great. I don't remember what it was. So I
think
apologize.
It was the pottery one, right?
It might be. It might have been pottery. Yes. So, okay, maybe you tell it if you remember it a little bit better than I do.
I think I've heard it. It might have been Outliers, but I think I've just seen it elsewhere too.
Sure.
You had one team that they said, okay, you have 30 days to make the one perfect pottery item. And then they were set off to do it. And then you had another team, they said, you will make as many pottery items as possible in 30 days. And on the last day, that's going to be the one you're judged on. And I think in the story or the anecdote, the one team that did the high volume, their last product was better than the team that just did one for 30 days, trying to refine and perfect it. And yeah, that totally captures what I think is the winning approach to, building a website, building a news outlet, building a newsletter, podcast, whatever it may be. It's the reps will smooth out your inadequacies over time.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I'm doing the podcast once a week, and I'll admit once a week podcast still feels like a lot of a podcast. If somebody is listening and they can't quite get to, your daily habit of launching a newsletter or something like that, is it worthwhile for them to at least start doing, set a goal once a month, twice a month, wake that up to once a week? Is there benefit to that? Or is it like, no, you really need to just, if this is a thing, commit and go?
I think you can commit to go on like a sliding spectrum sort of. So let's say you can only do maybe once a week or once every other week. That's still better than nothing, I would say.
Sure.
But you shouldn't, I would say ideally you're aiming to ramp up over time. And maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Sure.
Like you can't go from 0 to 7 days a week usually. But if you go from, if you're aiming for once every 2 weeks, the aspiration should be to not stay at that level for too long, because I think it's really hard to build momentum unless you're doing a high volume of work. Because, let's say what you could do in a year with low volume, you can do in 3 weeks at high volume or something like that. And the distance between like a rookie to like a proficient level, you can just shrink that so dramatically if you lean into high volume. So that's what I did with my own blog for a lot of years. It's what I'm doing with the newsletter now. Like I feel like, 6 weeks into Opening Bell Daily, I really think every single edition has gotten better than the day before. And that's been, 30 something editions already. And we just launched, it feels like yesterday we just launched. And to me, that's my latest indicator of, okay, volume is such a winning strategy.
Yeah. So you mentioned momentum too, and I want to come back to that. But before I do, there was something else you were talking about here, which is just that idea of, again, going back to volume and being able to do this multiple times. I think that's one of the allures on why I like the agency. And so this is a plug on agencies versus in-house on a lot of things. This is not always true for everything. And just to clarify for anybody listening, I never worked at an agency prior to starting an agency. I was only in-house. And so, but one of the benefits that I see is by the time you've run 10 tests in-house, we've run 100 tests across 100 different clients. And in that amount of time, we've learned so much more about what's working on these ad platforms. And so I do think that, to your point, there's a lot that can be learned in volume that just can't be learned when you're trying to be too perfectionist about something.
That's such a good point. It's also, if you're doing 100 tests across 100 clients, those are, in theory, 100 different voices you're using, 100 different models or formats. And that's even, to me, that's almost more interesting than doing 100 reps of the same newsletter. Doing 100 reps for different people from one agency is pretty, the improvements must be radical over time.
Yeah, yeah. So coming back to momentum, though, that you said, I like that you talked about this being editorial strategy being a thing of momentum where it gains and gathers like a snowball effect. And that's a lame thing to say, but it's just, I can't think of a better way to say it. Um, it one thing that I've noticed with some people, especially in e-commerce, and this could be in SaaS as well, um, is the desire to capitalize on their blog, newsletter, whatever, too early. Um, would you share this sentiment that you see people sometimes trying to capitalize too early on some of these things versus letting it gain the momentum and start getting the exposure and the reach and the follows and the shares? Or do you think
Yeah,
those could
that
be done at the same time?
I mean, I think if you're running a business, I think content is like the flywheel for that business. Depending on the business, of course, but for many
Sure.
businesses, content is sort of like a top of funnel that you can bring business in from. Um, but also, I don't think it's like it's very hard to equate that to being a revenue driver, let's say. Um, yeah, I mean, if you if you're putting a lot of time into content early, I don't think it can hurt, but I do think there's limited upside based on, your audience might not be there yet to appreciate that volume of content. But then, sort of a catch 22, the volume is how you get new audience and get eyeballs. So yeah, I don't know, that's not a very coherent answer to your question, but maybe you could try saying it again, and I can try repeating an answer to you.
No, I think it's perfect. I think what I've seen is sometimes people try to, let's say, capitalize a blog too early. And there was a trend where the idea was, let's say, gating some of the content too early versus just getting the content out there. And I felt like when I would see companies do this, it would stunt their growth of the actual blog or whatever they're trying to grow at that time. Like if I started gating, the podcast versus getting it out there for free, it's like, sure, then maybe you've capitalized on it, but you never gained the reach or exposure that you wanted to. And so I guess a better question would be, how do you continue to build that momentum? What are some of the tips and tricks that you've used to take from 0 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000? And maybe it's even faster, but that concept.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. I think there's definitely a danger of paywalling things too early, like as far as a podcast or a newsletter, because I think if you don't have the trust of an audience yet, why would they pay?
Sure.
So you have to provide a pretty, I think, sizable amount of content that a reader will know they like, know they learn from, or know that they're entertained from before they're even willing to consider paying for anything. And then that doesn't even touch on like, what price point will people most be willing to pay at and all that. But I think there's a huge upside of publishing a lot of free content because I think that's how you win early trust. And then the early trust is the momentum because if someone really likes a newsletter, for example, they will tell a friend or they'll post it on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. And when everyone can click and not hit a paywall, I think that's just a huge, these days it's kind of a sigh of relief. And, something that I think a lot of news outlets are running into now is the writers can't really share their own work without people asking them to, hey, can you screenshot your article for me because
Sure.
I can't get around the paywall. And I don't know if that's I think that's really hard to keep momentum when that is the case. Because if all your writers can't even get their own work in front of friends and family, um, what does that mean for the bigger business or the brand if no one's reading their work other than the super fans? Because then it's if only your super fans read the work and then everyone else is kind of gated out of that, I would guess it's harder to grow from that. And there's different ways to slice it and nuance it, but that's what it seems like right now.
Yeah. There's two other things on editorial strategy that I really want to touch on. One would be learning from your audience and how you're going about that. And I'll start with that one. But the other one that I want to make sure I say so we don't forget is how to continue to grow that audience in ways that you're using to do that. So let's start with first, how are you learning from your audience? I think about this from the podcast perspective. I think it's a little bit maybe potentially easier in the newsletter space because you actually have their email address. You can email them. But if I wanted to learn from my audience what they love and don't love, just in general, what are tricks that you're using for learning from your audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think with a newsletter, the feedback can be pretty immediate and, similar with if you're writing articles on the internet or on a news outlet and you're seeing a comment section kind of blow up, then you must have hit a nerve with something, whatever you're writing that day. So that's sort of an immediate feedback. And same with YouTube videos too. You can see comment sections and how people respond. But in a newsletter specifically, some days I'll get a million responses to the newsletter, like people hitting reply and putting a note in saying like, hey, you were, maybe you missed the mark that day, or like, I really liked how you said this or framed this, or this really helped clarify something. And then other days, yeah, radio silence. You send a newsletter out and no one says anything. Sure. Then maybe it's like, it's more likely it wasn't good rather than it was perfect. I would like to think that when no one says anything, wow, that must have been a perfect addition. That's probably not the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of signal is helpful, I would say. And, sometimes it comes down to your subject line in a newsletter. Like maybe fewer people open it and that means fewer people are responding or clicking, whatever that may be. Or some days I can check Facebook or LinkedIn and see how many people shared the newsletter that day on their social channels. And if I nailed a newsletter one day, then more people will share it. And that's how I know if the newsletter was, if it resonated or not. And your second question, can you say that again?
Yeah. And so the second one then is, and I think you're almost hinting at this, sharing being a big part of this, but how do you consistently grow that audience? Because I imagine you're not just writing it and saying, hey, I hope they all start listening and reading to what I'm saying. You're doing things intentionally.
Yeah. So something I've learned being in sort of mainstream news for a few years, if you do not promote your own work, then no one else will typically. Like that's, sometimes a little bit, but really you have to be the driving force of getting people to pay attention to your work because everyone has such limited time and attention, and there are infinite news sources or social media apps that are pulling that attention. So if you don't try to raise your hand even a little bit, then no one's going to find you. So, when I was at Business Insider, if I wrote 2,000 articles, I probably made at least 1,800 LinkedIn posts about those. Like I was sharing almost every single article I wrote over several years. And definitely, yeah, at some points it probably felt like too self-promotional to some people. But then also it's like, I'm sure there were so many readers that only found my work not through Google or Business Insider, but because I was sharing it on my own personal channels. And I think that's important. And a lot of that compounds over time because, if I share an article on Monday and then 150 people see it, maybe on Twitter, then I could share the same article Wednesday and maybe 25 of the same people see it, but then a new 50 people see it. So you can really, you can reshare a lot of the same content over and over. And with social media, like it's kind of this black box algorithm, but you're almost certain to run into new audience every single time you share something. So if you do that regularly with all your content, for me, I'm publishing 5 newsletters a week right now. And if I post each one twice, then that's like 10 social posts a week. And I've already done the work in writing the newsletter, and I just have to write a little blurb or repurpose it for LinkedIn or X. And so I would say it's like the consistency in sharing and raising your hand is important if you want to get eyeballs in the sort of this era.
No, I think that's very important as well, and I do want to get into some of that personal branding stuff then a little bit later as well. Um, I think it would be impossible to have a conversation about editorial strategy without talking AI in some fashion. One of the things that I remember you wrote is that you're not a big fan of AI, that you called it the opposite of the printing press. You didn't call it but like it's some people have said it's almost like the printing press, like the modern version. And you're like, it's the opposite. What do you mean by AI being the opposite of the printing press?
I think the printing press democratized information and more people were able to read. And if you created something, more people were able to see what you created. But now, if everyone relies on something like ChatGPT, and then everyone relies on also like some type of large language model to analyze that work that is being distributed by AI in the first place, it's everything becomes so derivative. So if the content that's being produced is AI generated, and then the analysis that's being consumed of that content is AI generated, the pool of information actually dwindles so dramatically. I think like it would proliferate as far as total volume, but maybe books become paragraphs, and then that's what people read moving forward. So yeah, I mean, it's not a great, I don't know if that's the best analogy I used as far as the opposite of the printing press, but it's so, I don't have a problem with technology or like the amazing AI tools that are coming out, but I do think there's a huge risk that everything becomes so unbelievably derivative, and we start consuming only derivative products and writing. That doesn't seem good, because if if you read a book, you are probably immersing yourself for 8 to 10 hours in the author's in some cases the author's life's work, and that takes you, let's say, 8 hours to read, took the author years to write maybe. And if that dynamic changes to you're reading AI generated summaries of a book, then and even maybe the book at some point will start being AI generated too.
Absolutely.
You're not getting the depth of knowledge, I don't think. But then at the same time, the people who choose to continue reading books and maybe not relying on AI generated reports about a book, I think that's a huge advantage moving forward. It's like, yeah, it takes a little more time, but the grasp of concepts and stories and the skill that comes with that, I think, is going to be more and more important, and it's going to be a bigger distinguisher moving forward. Like if you have the focus to read a book for 10 hours, that as it is today is like dwindling so fast. Like books are becoming, I think, sort of this like antiquated medium, which makes me sad because I've written 2 books. But yeah.
I hadn't thought about it like this, but I like where you're going with it, even though it is a bit dystopian, right? But it's almost kind of like reminds me of Wall-E, the movie, a little bit, where everything is almost just thought for them, and they're like, "Oh, blue's the new red." And you just click it, and they've all got this, blue suit on now because, to your point, I hadn't thought about how that would shape the future. But we need to be intentional now about making sure that we're still creating absolutely original thought.
Yeah, I mean, did you see there was a clip of one of the dating app executives
Yes.
a week ago saying like the future of dating is going to be our AI dating other AI,
Yes.
and it's like, where's the intimacy there, or where's the risk taking, where's the soft skills, and sort of the excitement of like meeting someone for the first time or cold approaching in a new place, like all that. If that all goes away, I don't know if that's to our benefit.
Right. I did see that, and it's just weird. I met my wife the old-fashioned way. Actually, we met on a trip. Basically, we met on a missions trip in Kentucky. We were there helping with this camp, and I mean, that's just what a great way to be able to meet somebody in person.
Yeah, AI is not replicating that. So
no. I want to transition into getting press, and So you've been on the other side of this. You've obviously covered a lot of people. You've quoted a lot of people. What are tricks that people can use to get more press for themselves, for their business, etc.?
So I would say meeting journalists is a great starting point. And I think that kind of goes with the idea, build the network before you need it. So if you are someone that happens to be friends with a lot of journalists, that's pretty cool because those are the people that will, yeah, that's the press essentially, like that you will be pitching if you one day have something to pitch. So on a very basic level, like uh, going out of your way to like meet and like just get to know some journalists never hurts. Um, as far as pitching, when I was at Business Insider, my inbox probably had 150 emails a day that were, yeah, story pitches from PR people or individuals wanting to share their own story or their own company or people raising money, whatever it was. And uh, it's very hard for one person to go through all of that. Read all of it for one, but let alone cover it in articles. So,
Mhm.
and also so many of the emails that I didn't recognize the sender, I would immediately archive because I just don't have the bandwidth to cover it. But then when I do recognize the sender, like maybe it's a individual, like a founder or a PR person that I've met in person, I'm way more likely to give it a thoughtful read and response. And that doesn't always mean I'm writing about it just because I know them, but I'll at least read it and I'll know who exactly is sending it to me. So a lot of this is relationship based. But if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of a like pitch email, I think there's a couple things there. So a subject line is huge. I open a lot of emails that say like your post on LinkedIn or like I saw your specific article about this or I saw your tweet about this. Like that gets my attention because then it's someone I know is not mass emailing, and that's a huge like
Right.
instant delete if I see a mass email, especially if it says dear reporter slash editor. That's the
Sure.
worst.
Yeah.
And so I immediately delete those or like you'll it's amazing how many PR people send emails with the wrong name. So they'll say like, hi Jeff or something, and I'm Phil, and I don't even read past that if they get the name wrong, because then I know they haven't looked at my prior coverage and they don't know what I write about. Um, but also, if you see a subject line, if journalists see a subject line, at least for me, that says like shocking stat or like you won't believe, like some sort of sensationalizing in the subject line, pretty much instant delete because it's usually not that shocking. If they have to say it's shocking,
Sure.
it's not going to be that shocking. um, and then in the body of the email, what I recommend is really short and to the point. So when I help people craft pitches, like even, and this is the same if I want to pitch as a freelance journalist to editors, my pitch is like 2 sentences. And I really try to nail like, okay, what is the story and why am I the person to tell it? And
Mhm.
if you can get those two things into 2 sentences and then say, and then sign off from there, that is really effective because the person you're writing to, yeah, they probably have over 100 pitches that day. So I think reporters appreciate when you're very brief because it shows you're not wasting their time. Like if I get an email that's 4 paragraphs long and it's a pitch, there's almost no shot I'm reading the whole thing.
Sure.
So that's yeah, I just don't have the bandwidth for it.
So I got a treat for you. I'm gonna have you grade what you think about my pitch that I wrote to Entrepreneur. This was
Okay.
the first time I really cracked into. I used to write a lot more than I do now, and wanted to write for Entrepreneur. And so I sent this pitch to the editor here. My subject line: another boring pitch from a mediocre writer.
I love
Like it,
that.
dude. Okay, good.
It's contrarian. I mean, because no one
Yeah.
would say that. So that's okay. I like that a lot, actually.
Okay. what's funny about that, and that's kind of what I was trying to get into the mind of who's reading this. I kind of assumed that they were doing the same thing where they're like, man, they probably get 150 of these a day, and it's like, how do I skate through that a little bit? I will say this is what Entrepreneur has said to me. The editor wrote back. He said, "What are you thinking with that subject line? I'm not reading your pitch." But I was like,
Wow.
okay, at least he replied. So I was like, all right, I got a chance. So I replied back and I was like, okay, here's why I said that. And he said, okay, you've got another chance. Send it to this person. I'm actually not the one who's in charge of this piece of that anymore. So I got another chance. And I
That's
did get in
amazing.
then.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't try to sensationalize, but you're also contrarian, I think that's a pretty powerful combination. And I've never really thought about that till we're talking about it right now, but that's a great, yeah, I love that. I might have to steal that for future pitching workshops.
Go
Pretty
for it.
good.
And then, so let's just say that they do have something to share. I think one of the things that you called out that I appreciated, aside from this, is it's not just about having something newsworthy, but why you? And I think that's maybe something that a lot of people, I would imagine, miss from their pitches, or maybe they have too much from this. If you had to weight the two pieces, is it that people just send you pitches that have something that's just not worth pitching, but they have a good reason for why them, but just not pitching? Or are they pitching something good, but they didn't really qualify why them? Which one do you say is lacking more?
That's a good question. I think it really depends. But I will say if I get a pitch that says, like, let's say, so this week there's a lot of meme stock activity. And if someone pitches me about talking about GameStop, for example, shares of GameStop going up and down, and they just say, like, this person can speak to, like, why trading volumes are so crazy, why the stock is going wild, whatever. But then they don't tell me, like, I have to know why they are the person to say those things, because you and I could say those things too. We could talk about why the stock's going up and down, and so could anyone at the local grocery store. Like it's all
Sure.
like anyone can say anything, but if there's no context behind, like, okay, what gives you the expertise? So for example, if I say, okay, you should just put your money into the S&P 500 every year and let it compound for decades, that isn't that interesting, and that's not that relevant to anyone because I'm me. But if Warren Buffett says it, and he does say it, everyone's like, oh my goodness, that's the greatest strategy of all time.
Sure.
But it's because he is Warren Buffett. So it's like that holds huge weight in a pitch as far as delivering delivering the context on why this person is right for a certain interview or a certain commentary. Because otherwise anyone could, it's like the words and the comments are important, yes, but I would say it's more important to know who they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. So have the right subject line, get their attention, have the right pitch, have something in there from a context standpoint, but then ideally have a relationship. And I think that makes so much sense because I'd say that's true in my own inbox as well. What about things like Haro? For them, against them, help a reporter out, HARO. Have you ever used them?
You might have to explain a bit more.
So there are services out there where some journalists will post that they're writing about something on what's called help a reporter out, HARO. And then like you can like submit something, you're like, hey, I've got something to share to that. Do you feel like that is actually beneficial, or is it just better to just get to know a reporter? And if you get to know a reporter, how?
Okay, so I am familiar with this, but I've never used it.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means, but I, for one, have never used it. I would say if a reporter is posting something, then they're definitely more inclined to respond because they're doing a call out for sources or experts. I'm very much a relationships guy, so I would always opt for that rather than a cold message or a cold email, even if it was an outreach. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have too much to say on that just because I personally don't really use those platforms. Yeah, I don't know.
So then there's another episode here. Katie Richardson was on here, and she got a lot of press. And one of the things that she said that was helpful for her was starting locally, and then that compounded itself into bigger and bigger opportunities. Would you say that that's a good strategy, or just go for the big ones?
I think that sounds like a great strategy. I always have the mindset, it's like once you get one, that one, if you get an article in Business Insider, that Business Insider article becomes your pitch for your next one. So your pitch gets easier and easier each time because you have sort of more like ammo in the tank. You can say, look, Business Insider already covered me. So now, hey, Forbes or hey, Fortune, TechCrunch, like, the sell is way easier because you're sort of vetted by another newsroom. And also there's a bit of FOMO when a reporter sees that if, they see someone's been interviewed by a top outlet, then they're like, wow, we should also interview them because then we can kind of share that clout or, share the story, whatever it is. And I think a lot of founders or business owners try to pitch too many places at once. So they'll try to go for the 5 or 8 biggest news outlets. But my suggestion would be just to go for one. And then if you get one, that one becomes your pitch to everyone else. So I think it's easier to sort of, if you ramp up after the one.
That makes a lot of sense. What about, I want to jump over into the personal branding side of things then too. And you had touched on this a little bit about how maybe it can feel self-promotional to promote your own stuff, but you have to do it. And that's one of the best ways people find you. A phrase that you use that I liked is you have to write yourself into the job you actually want. What do you mean by that?
I think it's a lot easier to show people what you can do or that you deserve something if you've been doing it for a long time already. So, my first newspaper job, I had no journalism background. I had no formal internships or experience, but I started a blog online that very few people read, but I wrote, 60 or 70 essays on it. And then someone did notice it. And that's how I got my first job at a newspaper. All those blog posts and articles were free and very few people read them. I didn't make any money. But because I'd been doing the work for so many months already and had so many reps under my belt when no one was watching, when someone did all of a sudden pay attention, I had a whole portfolio to share with them. And that was my first, sort of my first signal that, okay, if I just do the work, no matter who's looking, I can, maybe get any job I want if I can just do it on my own and show the initiative and the passion and sort of the gumption to do this. So that's, and I think over time, what that did for me, I think I almost have more of a reputation for writing a ton of volume. Like, I think a lot of people know me through how much I talk about doing the work and putting out a lot of volume of writing versus almost any one topic I cover. So like more than finance or more than my books, more than my newsletter, I think people know me as just the person who writes a ton of stuff online. And like,
Sure.
yeah, for better or worse, like that is, I think, the case right now. But being known as someone who does the work is not, there are worse things to be known for. And if you're looking for a job, that's a great thing to be known for, because a manager or employer, they want people who have no problem putting their head down and working. And if you can do that before you get to that job, chances of success just go up.
So when it comes to personal branding, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's less about even branding yourself as the expert of whatever the different things are that you're trying to do, but more about even just the journey along the way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think the journey is great if you can document it and sort of show your work as you go. But you could brand yourself however you want. And I think
Sure.
you can, that opportunity, you can just keep reinventing yourself sort of. And I think if
Mhm.
you have the work to back it up, you like it almost always goes in your favor because
Mhm.
the work is what will smooth over sort of all the doubts and the haters and people who say like,
Sure.
oh, you're being too self-promotional, whatever. It's like, yeah, like maybe you're being self-promotional, but you have your 10,000 hours under your belt that you can show anyone. You have your stack of evidence that you're not just being like, you're not just shilling something, a company or a
Sure.
product. You have so much evidence that you are the person that does the work. And that is super powerful, I think. And, but something that, uh, to pivot for a sec on the personal brand stuff, um, for journalists specifically, and I think there's a tie here to business owners that you'll have to make for me. But when I write an article, let's say I'm writing an article about GameStop, I know there's going to be 200 other articles that day about GameStop, and most reporters they will post the article and then a blurb about GameStop. But what I would do instead, and this is what I typically do, I'll post my article, but then I'll instead of writing about the article, I'll write about who I called, what my writing process
Mhm.
was, why I picked the angle I did, my thought process behind what's going on. So essentially, the story behind the story. And that I
Like
think
that.
is a super powerful lesson for personal branding because if you're sharing an article or sharing content, most people already know what the thing is. But if you
Sure.
share the behind the scenes and your own personal process, I think that captures what I believe to be personal brand. It's like, who are you and why are you the person to do this? And that's way
Mhm.
more interesting to a lot of people than the actual like GameStop article. So
Mhm.
I just wanted to like sort of tie that into what I do myself.
We love behind the scenes as a just
Yeah.
human race, right? We love being able to take a peek behind the curtain and see what's going on. And I could see that being very valuable on LinkedIn posts and Twitter posts and whatever to be able to say, here's the why, here's the who, here's the what.
Yeah.
That's good. I want to get into why you quit your dream job. You had a job, national newsroom, decided to go independent. It was your dream job. Why? Like, what was the thought behind that?
It was time to try something new and independent. And I think I'm making a bet that media will continue to fracture more and more. So I've seen so many journalists that were excellent in their mainstream newsrooms that went independent over the last year or two, and they have had a lot of success, and they've had a lot of readers come to their sort of niche product or audience, um, and you can see this with the ballooning of the creator economy. Um, People want to follow people, not corporations.
Mhm.
And I think social media has made that more possible than ever, um, and also more viable to make those audiences or products into real businesses too. So my sense is that media is sort of at this turning point, and it has been the last couple of years where being at the New York Times or the Business Insider is now no longer the only way to get the word out about things.
Sure.
You can build your own audience, and sort of gatekeeping that distribution is no longer the case for these legacy outlets. So me going independent with a new, sort of a new media brand um, is part of that bet I'm making. That media will continue to fracture, legacy newsrooms will struggle to retain the eyeballs they've had for decades, and people will continue following people instead of companies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We are a relational being as human beings, so we want that relationship with another human being. And there's even a lot of research out there about mirroring, right, and how we mirror other beings, other animals mirror us. So it's harder for us to mirror corporations. and to feel the same kind of connection.
Totally. It's also different if you know, the New York Times told me to do this feels sort of condescending, but if it's
Sure.
this person said to do this, that's a little more relatable.
Hmm. I like that. Um, I love getting into the personal side of who my guests are as well, and so I want to have a little section about who is Phil Rosen. Um, one of the things we talk about is how to up arrow other areas of your life. And one of the things that you talked about to me that you said that I really appreciated was reading books is the antidote to everything wrong with modern society. What do you mean by that?
I think a lot of that just comes down to attention span.
Yeah,
I think if you can't focus, you don't have control over your own mind. And if you don't have control over your own mind, you're limited in what you can think about and what you can create. But reading is the ultimate focus tool. You learn and you study and you immerse yourself in someone else's life's work. And that is so sort of alien today because most people are scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, whatever it is, and I'm guilty of it as well. I should read more. But if you spend more time reading books, you are sort of you're like building a moat around yourself in this attention economy where our attention is so pulled and divided.
mhm,
But books demand your full attention. You can't be scrolling while you're reading. Like, if you're watching a
totally.
movie or a show, you can kind of still be scrolling, but a book, you really can't be doing that. And I think if more people read more, including myself, we would be better at doing a lot of other things in our life.
Yeah. There's a interesting comic by I think his name is Nathan Pyle, and he almost draws like these aliens that speak in this language that's kind of like English, but it's really like how we would speak if it was like a foreign idea or concept to us. And one of the ones that he has there shows somebody watching a movie, or it's a couple watching a movie, and the one person is scrolling and then asking a question about the movie. And the other being's like, I mean, you would know if you were watching along with me. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
but you're my best friends. You'll tell me anyways. But to your point, we can watch a movie and scroll and kind of be distracted, and that's very hard to do with a book. I know that you said that you're a big reader. You read, the Wall Street Journal and a bunch of other things every morning, but that's for work. Are you reading then for personal pleasure, for personal benefit? Like, and how much are you reading?
Yeah, I'm reading. I read a lot of books for sure. Books are my favorite pastime. And again, all this is not to say I never use social media and I'm never scrolling because I do.
Totally.
And I'm trying to do less, but I definitely it's hard. So I do read books though, and I read a lot of fiction. I love short stories, and I love classic fiction, the stuff that we all spark noted in English class in high
Mm.
school. Um, and But I also read quite a bit of business books. Like I recently finished this book called The Smartest Guys in the Room, which is from maybe 20 years ago, but it's about the fall of Enron, and it's just a
Mhm.
great, compelling sort of you know corporate catastrophe story. And so I read a lot of like business narrative books and a lot of classic fiction. Um, a few years ago, I went through a gazillion personal growth and self help books. I kind of went through a phase. So I read very widely, I would say. Like I try to sprinkle in history books as well. Um, but I think I think a lot of what I can do as a writer and reporter comes from all these years of just reading books. Like I very much point to that as the bedrock to everything I do.
Mhm.
So the reason I can uh, write the way I write or perform as a journalist and reporter is because I've been obsessively reading for so many years, and that's given me sort of this yeah, maybe a web of knowledge I wouldn't have otherwise gotten from.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't even there's nothing that comes close, I think, as far as taking in information other than reading. So that's been a huge, huge way I've sort of bolstered myself, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of reminds you of something else that you've told me before, which was that some of these things are less about the routine, more about the discipline and the habit, that the 10,000 hour rule is not a myth.
Yeah. There's no, if you do something long enough, you are bound to get good at it. And I think a lot of people give up before they see that come to fruition. Whether it's writing or podcasting or starting a YouTube channel, even sticking with a job as a reporter, like these things, as long as you continue to show up for long enough, like there's no way you can't make a success out of it, is what I think. Um, and that really is like, yeah, I think that, the 10,000 hour rule, it's kind of a cliche at this point, but I think there's so much wisdom behind
I
it.
agree.
Like the message of it, I think uh, is important. And I try to, you know, if there are days where I feel like I aren't good enough at this one thing, or I don't know what to write about, or whatever it may be, then I always take a step back and I'm like, okay, in a year from now, if I just keep going, then I'll remember this day, and like it'll be kind of just like a blip, and it'll get smoothed over by all the volume I've done since that day. And that's the only way to get better at things, I think.
I'm with you 100%. Love the 10,000 hour rule. It's brutal, but true. And I can see that even in my own life. And it's only now that I really buy into it. I wish I would have bought into it maybe more when I was younger, but the older I get, the more that I realize just how true it is. And it's something I try to instill in my kids as well as they're young and they're working on something. It's like, whatever you want to do, like you could be great at it, but like there's nobody that will be incredibly great at any one of those things for the most part without putting that in. It's like whoever you want to model, right? And so it's maybe my oldest, wants to be a singer or something. It's like Taylor Swift has put in at least 10,000 hours
Oh
into
yeah,
being Taylor Swift. And that's true for
yeah,
every other person that you look up to.
yeah, absolutely. There's no one who reaches the top of their craft without
Right.
doing that. And no one's taking shortcuts. I
Right.
think shortcuts are also such a myth because uh, you know, Taylor Swift or like LeBron is not
Mm,
you know, they're not taking shortcuts or like faking their way to the top of the mountain. They
right.
are that good because they've worked that hard. And I think we can all do that at some scale in our own lives.
Totally. Last thing I wanted to chat with you about is the creative journalist, but we talked about this a little bit. What is it and what inspired you to put this together?
Yeah. I created Journalist Club in February of this year. It's only a couple months ago. I noticed that media, including my own company at the time, was going through a ton of layoffs. I saw a lot of
Mm,
friends that were really talented lose their jobs. Um, and layoffs can be arbitrary and brutal and have nothing to do with how good you are at your craft. Um, and at some point, I realized, wow, it'd be really great for everyone, reporters, if we knew more people at other companies. And so I started hosting these dinners, and then they are 10 journalists each, everyone from a different news outlet, and they're not work events, so no one's showing up online or we a lot of journalists know each other through press events or conferences, and we kind of see each
mhm.
other or we recognize each other's bylines, but we don't really spend non-work time together. And that's where you build those relationships and friendships. And I think in a lot of ways you need that support system in as tough an industry as media. So so I created Journalist Club, and I've now hosted um, in a little over 2 months. I've hosted 130 reporters and journalists, editors
Wow.
at various events in New York City, and I have a bunch more events planned. And I think a lot of everyone I've spoke to who's attended an event has found it really rewarding to meet people doing the same job as them who work at different companies. And I knew something about my own experience at Business Insider, I knew everyone in my own company, but I didn't know really anybody who worked at, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Bloomberg, wherever it was. But now through these events, I know a lot of reporters at every single outlet that has a New York City presence. And that's been really special and inspiring for me because I get to chat and meet and hang out with all these people who are great at what they do and who are also just looking for meetings with people doing the same job as them. And that's been, it's some of the most important work I'm doing right now is producing these events.
It reminds me of, let's just say if I was going to bring that back to e-commerce a little bit, one of the things that I tell new founders is do the things that don't scale. And this is a great example of that, where this doesn't scale. Like there's a limit to how much of this that you can do. But if you're launching a brand, let's say that you're launching a kids mitten brand, if somebody discovers your brand, they see an ad on social media, they buy it, they'll like it, they might love it, but it's completely different than the kind of love and rep that they want to give you if they met you and hung out with you. And, you 10 people at a time here or there, these different events, and they're meeting you and hanging out and testing out the glove. They become fanatical fans about what you're doing and telling everybody else that they know. And so, launching a brand, launching a newsletter, launching anything that you're doing, one of the best ways to really jumpstart that growth and get that feedback in very real time is exactly doing what you're doing. Put together some time to get in real life with people that you admire, that you enjoy, that you want to be a part of.
Totally. It's this is not scalable, and it's also some of the most energizing and fun stuff that I get to experience. So there's a lot to take from that, I think.
That's good. Well, Phil, I have really enjoyed learning from you today and getting to know you a little bit more. If people wanted to follow you, to subscribe, obviously, as well, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
Yeah, my newsletter is called Opening Bell Daily, and it's free. You can Google it and hopefully subscribe. It comes out 5 days a week. And then on, if you look up Phil Rosen, you can find my Twitter and my Instagram, my LinkedIn. I'm everywhere on socials. Very easy to find. You can also find my books on Amazon. I have 2 books. You type in Phil Rosen, they'll also come up there. Everything is just my name. You just look up my name and then all this stuff will come up and take you to different corners of the internet. So
that's brilliant. Thank you again for joining, sharing your wisdom, sharing your time with us today, Phil.
Thank you, William. It's great to talk with you.
Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.